Russia has a massive army. It's a remnant left over from the Soviet Union, but still incredibly powerful. And it's almost certainly the second or third most powerful in the world, depending on how you might rate China. I've made videos on their air force, artillery, and several on tanks. And despite much of it being left over from the Soviet days, they are still the second largest in the world in terms of sales of weapons. So they're still able to produce desirable and affordable military equipment. So they have the equipment, they have a large number of people in active service with a large population to draw from to mobilize, and they have all the experience, all the journals, the research, studies, and thought on how to best fight a war that's been left over from the Soviet Union. So it's really a question of why they can't easily win in Ukraine. First, real quick, our sponsor, HelloFresh. They're an awesome company that I actually use and pay for myself. It takes the hassle out of each upcoming meal. They send you pre-portioned ingredients with simple to follow instructions. So simple that even somehow I'm able to follow them myself. And they save you money. Going out or ordering will quickly cost you an arm and a leg. The food is incredible too. It cuts down on food waste by at least 23% compared to grocery shopping. And they also have a wide selection of meals to choose from. 40 different recipes and over 100 seasonal and convenience items every week. I was actually just talking to my best friend recently about this, and it turns out he actually already uses HelloFresh. I told him he should use my link, but either way, he already loves it. And the best part is, you can easily skip weeks. So, use my link, or go to HelloFresh.com and use code POG AUG50, and you'll get 50% off plus free shipping. Click the link in the description, or scan this QR code here with your phone. Again, HelloFresh. The war began good for Russia. They conducted large opening strikes to degrade Ukrainians' air force, air defenses, and to some extent their command and control. Their armies advanced quickly, gaining large amounts of ground in every direction. Russia appeared to be living up to its reputation of a highly capable military force. But then, within a few weeks, serious problems began to appear which forced Russia to eventually retreat from all the territory it had gained around Ukraine's capital and across the entire north. Now that over a year has passed, we can get a better idea of what happened. There's two main views on what happened. The US and Western side is that Russia planned this war with just his small inner circle to try to keep it as secret as possible. US intelligence, however, discovered the plans, and President Biden announced this back in mid-January, a month before the war, and then again just 6 days before the war, saying that Putin had already given the order and the war would start within a week, which it did. But since the plans were kept secret, Russian forces weren't told or given those plans till right before the war started. Therefore, they had very little time to familiarize themselves with the plans, or to make adjustments and changes based on what type of equipment, supplies, and set up the logistics it would need. And these are all things that officers that are more directly involved with their troops will be a lot more knowledgeable with and better able to plan than a small group close to Putin. The Russian side is that their troops were built up near Ukraine in Russia and Belarus as part of a military exercise, and that they would soon be returning to their bases. They said the US claims that they'd invade were false, and they denied it right up to a day before the war. Then in April, after a month of fighting, they claimed that they had discovered Ukraine's plans to invade Donetsk and Luhansk back in March. So they were forced to act with a preemptive war in February, and therefore they didn't have a lot of time to draw up their own military plans. Either way, the plans were faulty, which explains the huge number of vehicle losses, logistical nightmares, and eventually having to have to retreat April 1st. And it's almost certain that Russia thought the war in Ukraine would be a quick one, and therefore they didn't need the greatest plans, and they could quickly just advance without working on securing their flanks. There's really no other way to explain the current situation they're in otherwise. The only other explanation is that they conducted one of the most absurd and largest military blunders of all history. Again, in the first month, they took huge swaths of territory, only to retreat later on and claim that it was all a bluff to distract Ukraine's military and pull them away from the east, which didn't happen as they've barely made any progress in the year and a half since. And the other reason given was to, quote, demilitarize Ukraine, which again didn't happen as Ukraine is now much better equipped with the help of Western aid than they were at the start of the war. But after withdrawing, Russia began to do better. Now they could focus on one smaller area, just eastern Ukraine, while holding on to the territory they took in the south. Plans were able to be devised and forces ready to execute them. And they gained a good amount of ground in the east, taking cities like Severodonetsk and Lyman. And it showed Russia still could conduct offenses, take ground, and learn from their mistakes and adapt, such as fixing logistics. But by this point in the war, what was holding Russia back was the lack of manpower and huge losses of equipment. And that became real evident when Ukraine, with the help of newly supplied weapons like HIMARS, were able to degrade Russia's ability to supply its troops and make massive counteroffensive, taking back ground in Kharkiv, where Russian forces were spread thin. And then again, shortly after, in Kherson, where Russia was limited to really just one bridge to supply and reinforce all their units there. But again here, Russia showed that they were able to adapt. This time the retreat was much more organized, with much less equipment losses. They began building up massive defensive lines to prevent another huge Ukrainian gain, conducted a partial mobilization to bolster its numbers, and remove a large number of tanks and vehicles from storage. But these new mobilized aren't anywhere near as well trained or experienced, and they didn't choose to fight there, but being forced to through mobilization, and tanks and vehicles from storage are older and less capable. Also, Russia began shaking up and switching around its generals, such as General Surovikin, who was put in charge of all forces in Ukraine in October, just to be removed in January. So overall, their military capability is severely degraded from what it was pre-war, which all brings us to where we are today. But there are also some pretty big changes to warfare that just more manpower and vehicles can't overcome. Drones have been the biggest game changer by far, and it's not just the multi-million-dollar Predator-type drones that the US has built, but also the cheap consumer drones that you can buy yourself. Just 10 years ago or so, they didn't exist. You had to be able to design and build, or buy manned recon aircraft, and risk a pilot that you've likely spent millions of dollars training in an attempt to observe your enemy's movements. Now, anyone could do it for just a few $100. There's really just no hiding anymore, anywhere near close to the front line. These drones, along with real-time battle management software, like Delta that Ukraine uses, means that the second you begin any offensive and moving vehicles around to begin an assault, your enemy will know about it and you'll almost certainly come under fire from artillery and other weapons. Your enemy is going to see you coming and adjust to stop you. In every tree line, there could be a machine gun nest, troops with anti-tank guided weapons like Javelin, and so on that could take out even the most capable tanks. And if you give your enemy enough time, anti-tank minefields spread across the front line. And that's the big problem that Ukraine is actually facing right now as they try to advance. The front lines have been drawn and fortified, on both sides. So that all makes the initial push in a war, before your enemy can build up defenses, so much more important. And again, that leads back to where Russia screwed up. In modern warfare, it's more important than ever to constantly keep the front line fluid, never giving your enemy a chance to dig in and form a defense. Which, if you can't do that, I think brings up a great question. Is it worth acquiring $5+ million tanks, such as the Leopard 2s given to Ukraine, when they are just as susceptible to an anti-tank mine or weapon as some older tank from 40 years ago? As I said earlier, overall, older vehicles are less capable. But there's always the old argument of quality versus quantity that has to be balanced out. And also another huge issue for Russia in being able to advance is their lack of air power. They have a fraction of what the US or China has, and that coupled with their lack of enough precision-guided bombs, especially things like glide bombs, like the US Stormbreaker that can hit moving targets 100 kilometers away out of range of air defenses on the front line. Also as well, modern tactics and anti-radiation missiles to destroy and degrade Ukraine's air defenses in general, so that their air force can even conduct strikes on Ukraine's front. All the old Soviet journals, studies, and writings on war included their thousands of strike and fighter aircraft, along with a massive helicopter force attacking across a wide front. And again, Russia doesn't have anywhere near that today. And then finally, there's the other less tangible factors that are hurting Russia, like corruption. There's been countless stories of Russian soldiers having to have to pay bribes to get the very basics or even be rotated off the front line. But that, and corruption in general, is really hard to verify. In fact, one of the main indicators used to calculate corruption is the CPI, or Corruption Perception Index. And there, Russia scores pretty poorly. But even with that, there's issues. And actually, the person who created CPI, Joanne Lambsdorff, left the project due to disagreements over how to quantify corruption. So it's a really hard one to prove and substantiate. But then there's also other things like Russia's more rigid command structure. In the US, lower-level officers and even NCOs are given more flexibility to make decisions and seize the initiative when an opportunity presents itself. Since they're right there on the front, they can react and take advantage of a situation quicker than waiting for a higher-level command, who are not at the front, to give their approval. Russia's more rigid structure means that they don't have the same level of tactical flexibility. And this could be one reason why Wagner was able to perform so much better than Russian regular forces, as they didn't have to deal with such a tight top-down command structure. So, there are many reasons why Russia isn't performing as well as expected, or really able to take charge and remain on the offensive, despite having a much larger force. Some of these can be corrected, others will take years to overcome and make the necessary changes, and there are some that Russia simply cannot afford with its current economy.